As we just saw, thousands have gathered outside of Buckingham Palace to pay their respects following the death of the Queen, with crowds spontaneously bursting into a rendition of God Save the Queen and then God Save the King. Notable figures and loyal subjects far and wide have honoured Her Majesty's faithful service across her 70-year reign, with flags flown half-mast, flowers laid outside Crown properties around the world, and messages of condolence and tributes posted all across social media. Joining me live now from London is Sky News Foreign Correspondent Annelise Nielsen. Annelise, you've just touched down in London. What are your first impressions about the feeling on the ground there?
The first impressions are that the nation is stopping. This is a moment to mourn the monarch that's defined modern Britain, and we've seen, even coming into the airport, there were people discussing it, there were people toasting the Queen at the airport bars. There's billboards all around the city showing Her Majesty's face, and we've seen crowds here at Buckingham Palace gathering, many walking up with flowers to leave there. And what I've also noticed is just a real variety of languages too. This is an influence beyond just Britain. Many in the Commonwealth have felt her legacy, and that's what's going to be observed over the next 12 to 13 days. We're still waiting on the official confirmation of when the funeral will be, but this is a meticulously planned event, and those formalities are getting underway today.
And we're expected to hear from King Charles soon. It feels strange just saying King Charles, but he is going to be addressing the nation.
It does feel strange after a 70-year reign of Queen Elizabeth, but he did automatically become king upon her death. That still has to be formalised by the Privy Council, which will take place tomorrow, all going to plan. We are expecting to hear from King Charles this evening at 6 p.m. London time. There will be a national address broadcast across the country, and you can imagine everyone will stop to watch all that takes place in that speech and hear about what his legacy will be from the passing of Queen Elizabeth. But we are also expected to see him leave with Queen Consort Camilla from Balmoral, travel down to Buckingham Palace. It's here he'll have an audience with Liz Truss as well, will be one of the first official things on the schedule.
Now, Charles, we've got to say, has had a low approval rating, certainly when compared to the Queen. Is the British public going to get behind him now that he's taking on this role, or do you still have a sense there that there's reservations about a King Charles?
Well, I think this is probably the best moment he's going to have. Everyone is talking about how much they loved Queen Elizabeth, her legacy, her service, and she really did put a concerted effort in during the Jubilee to establish that Charles is her legacy. You'll remember that final moment where there was the balcony appearance with the Queen when we thought she wouldn't appear because she'd been suffering from ill health. She was there with Charles, with William and their families. That was the clearest indication that this was the slimmed down monarchy that she was leaving for the public in the United Kingdom. And this has been probably the biggest contentious issue for the royal family, is how much do they cost. And she's been sensitive to that during her reign. She started paying income tax. They've started being more thoughtful about spending on things like travel. We see all the criticism, of course, every time they hop on a private jet. But what is going to be the moment here is to define what the royal family is going to mean for Britain. And this does also come off the back of a tough couple of years in the COVID pandemic. The royal family really reasserted itself as that steady hand in times of turmoil. And Liz Truss mentioned that again as well in her comments after the passing of the Queen, where she said the Queen has been the rock of modern Britain. So Charles has a lot of goodwill coming his way at this point in time, I would say.
And you mentioned the COVID lockdowns and the pandemic, and we saw with Prince Philip's passing, the Queen was offered the opportunity to bypass some of those restrictions that funerals had at the time, and she declined. She didn't want to have conditions that others weren't afforded. So she sat there by herself and mourned without having someone comforting her. And I think those moments will stay with a lot of people for a long time, that sense of service she had and sense of duty.
Yeah, I mean, that's what's really defined so much of her reign. I mean, when we talk about service, it's easy to say, well, she's a queen, she lives in a palace, she's unbelievably wealthy, how tough could that be? But she's kept her mind on the public that entire time. I mean, remember her service in the war. Originally, they were recommended to evacuate her and Princess Margaret to Canada to avoid any of the battles that were potentially coming their way, to avoid the Blitz. And the royal family said no, they were going to stay. The girl stayed in Windsor, and she was advised to not take part in the war effort, to focus on her duties as sovereign, and she said, no, I'm going to go out there and train as a mechanic. So this is the moments, especially in the times of crisis, where the royal family proves its worth, and I think they've hit a very good point in their influence off the back of the pandemic. And it does take time. I mean, even think about the fact we're talking about Queen Consort Camilla. That was never going to happen 20 years ago. But they've pushed on, they've done the plotting work that's often not the most attractive work, especially, I'm sure, some members of the royal family thinking maybe Duchess of Sussex wasn't too keen on some of those not so glitzy events, but that's what keeps the royal family going. And we can imagine Charles is very much aware of that.
Now, before you go, we saw a rainbow and then a double rainbow appear above Buckingham Palace today. And I've got to say, I'm not particularly sentimental or religious, but it's almost a divine moment. And people saw that and immediately thought of Queen Elizabeth joining Prince Philip. It was just a beautiful little moment, wasn't it?
Oh, it was just magic. And yeah, I mean, what are the chances that it was some deity intervening to make a rainbow? But the fact that that was such a magic moment for so many Britons shows what an influence she has, that we're looking for that symbolism. And Balmoral was special to her. It's where Prince Philip proposed. It's where she could be her young self without any of the pressures. She could go to local dances and not have the intrusion of the general craziness of being a royal. So it was quite special that that's where she ended up passing away with her family by her side. And I think there's going to be a lot of that over the coming weeks, because people do really adore Queen Elizabeth, and there's going to be a lot of love.
Absolutely. Annelise Nielsen, thank you so much for joining me tonight.